Okay, here we are. Maiden voyage. Let's try it out.
Okay.
Welcome to the Disruptor Podcast from Songplode. We got Kessler Douglas, musicologist, myself, A&R and producer, and today's guest, we have VISSIA, alt pop recording artist from Edmonton, Alberta. How are we doing today?
Great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Kessler, what have you been up to, man?
Well, I'm currently in Ottawa working on my thesis, so I'm doing lots of reading and lots of writing and enjoying the heavy snowfall we've been getting over here. Went through a nice walk just before this.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. I took a walk today myself, and it's so easy to get like stuck in the studio mindset, and you literally do not leave, go outside at all, and then you go outside and you're like, oh my God, it's like a spring day, it's a spring week, what am I doing cooped up?
Exactly, yeah. And I'm also working from home for the most part, so I definitely get into a mindset, especially this time of year, of kind of just being a hermit, not doing anything. But
Yeah, it's very very easy to get just straight up stuck in your rut. What about you, Vis? How's Edmonton been treating you?
Oh, it's been pretty good. I mean, it's pretty crazy warm right now, so that's good. And the sun's out, and so yeah, I try to get outside once a day if I can. But yeah, mostly working in my little space here and working on writing an album and shaking my fists in the air when I need to.
Exactly, absolutely. So we wanted to get Vis on our Maiden Voyage podcast because, well, she's an artist that's working with us a lot, and we're really excited about her music. But very recently, she caused a bit of a social media storm in Canadian context, I guess, um, around an issue with, I guess, arts workers and pay. This, do you want to run us through what happened?
Sure. It's quite simple, actually. Well, the Edmonton International Airport sent out an email to artists who have previously played their music program. And yeah, at the airport, they have live musicians playing throughout the week usually. And then because of COVID, that was paused. But yeah, they sent out an email kind of letting artists, musicians know that they're going to start it back up in February. And lo and behold, they kind of near the bottom of their email, it said that you would not get paid, and they'd also revoked any kind of hospitality. So, so yeah, I just put a tweet out on Twitter, just kind of calling them out and telling other people about it, and asking them to also call them out in a very casual way. I wasn't really expecting, I think, as much of a response as I got, but yeah, that little tweet kind of blew up for me, at least on a local level. And I was contacted by a handful of media outlets to talk about it. And yeah, I think, I don't know how many hours later, but it was just like maybe a day and a half to 2 days after my tweet, they came back saying that they would pay artists. So, ta
Right.
da!
Yeah, interesting and not surprising that, a social media storm would cause kind of a large corporation to do basically damage control,
Yeah.
and come out and say, oh, now we're gonna, we do take these artists seriously, and we believe that they deserve some sort of compensation. Um, but my understanding of this program is they've never paid artists for this program, kind of in the history. Do you know much about the history of the program?
I know like a loose history of it.
Mm-hmm.
So like I played it twice, I think in 2019, at a time when I was just kind of like, how can I make some money now? And so I thought, well, I know it's not paid, but I'll check it out and see. Maybe I can make, a couple $100 or something.
because you can
But
still busk and sell merch and stuff like that.
that's what it is. It's just you
Yeah.
can accept tips and sell merch. Which like selling merch isn't really, yeah, that's not really a selling point. I don't think it should be. But yeah, I tried it out and it was not my vibe at all. And it also just, went against my values. So I thought, this is not for me and I don't want to do it. At the time, I wasn't really in a position where I had even like I don't have like a huge platform online even now, but like I had way less of one then. And it didn't even really occur to me to like, put up a fight much because, it was kind of in process and people were already doing it. But I've heard in the past that there has been some sort of payment, but I don't really, someone said, I think like maybe $100. Like, I don't really know. I don't have the facts for it, but it seems pretty like, loose and not very consistent. But when I did it, it was not paid at all. So long story short.
That's super interesting to me. Like, I'm just really curious around, even the thinking about like, okay, we're going to allow this small business to come into, a private area and essentially set up a bazaar, kind of like a marketplace, in a private area and just start hawking merchandise. It's really similar. Like, it's similar if you're like, hey, come to Disneyland, we're going to let you in for free and you can start just troubadouring around and just selling your wares.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm just, it really seems to be like, we're back to this, like, oh, like we'll let you in the castle gates and, you can start hawking your merchandise. Like, does anyone know, is there any knowledge around just what it is to be able to kind of go into a private area, like a ticketed area, and just start kind of selling your random merchandise? Like this, in your case, like, did you ever have to sign something that kind of gave you I guess like an ability to do this, like, or are they just kind of allowing you to do this kind of under the table?
No, there was never any paperwork in that way at all. It was interesting though, because I got a call from the musicians union yesterday, I think. Yeah. And yeah, just about this because I had emailed them as well because I was like, just so you know, this is what's happening. I tend to kind of email the musicians union whenever something like this comes up because I think, well, they should know about this and they should be doing something about this. And turns out they have known about this for a while and have like approached the airport about this and tried to kind of like educate them, like, like you need to be paying musicians. But then on the other hand was saying how, this particular person who works for the musicians union, he's been there forever, but he was just saying he knew some musicians who had played it and made pretty good money at it. So on one hand, he was like, well, who am I to take away a well-paying gig from some musicians? But yeah, in terms of like selling merch, it's like one thing he told me was that someone at some point from the airport had likened it to like, oh, well, we have all these shops here in the airport and they all pay rent to be here. And we're not charging musicians rent to be here. And so this is their kind of like way of justifying it, I think, being like, well, we're just offering them a space and they can come and do it. But I think that's just totally a weird way of looking at it. And I don't think that really lines up with what the music actually represents and what it does. So I don't know. I told the musicians union, like, still, like, we have to fight constantly for what we deserve, like, as musicians and like to be taken seriously. And like, this is like not a public space. It's a private company and like, it's not a busking situation. It just isn't. That's not what busking is.
No, and also, am I right that like they give you a particular space and a particular time slot or something like that?
Yeah, they're essentially like scheduling you into their schedule, and they have 3 or 4 different spots, I think. And they'll have like a little like bow system there or something, but like no one's taking care of you or running that at all. You're kind of just like, here's your spot. Do what you want, I guess.
Yeah. I also find like the timing kind of weird of it. Like I'm also from Edmonton, I'll say, although I am in Ottawa, and I know that like the Edmonton Arts Council last year, for example, put out like uh, a big fund for from I think from the city of Edmonton directly for performers and for arts and art organizations and festivals, which that maybe that program wouldn't have applied to the airport, but it's still a little odd that kind of more broadly in the scene, there's kind of been a bunch of, at least on one level, money put into to making sure performers are paid, and then for like right after that, I don't know. The
Yeah, totally. Yeah, honestly,
the timing
it
of
was just kind of mind-boggling to me. I was like in this economy, come on, you guys. Like this was like their chance to kind of like almost have another chance at like doing it better, and then no, they also took away, the shitty little Tim Hortons gift card you would get that was maybe $10. Like, I don't know. It's just like, oh, if you're hungry or thirsty, be prepared to bring snacks or like pay $100. Like airport food is so expensive. The only thing they paid for was parking. That was only consistency, really. So, but it's just an example of a bigger issue here. Because if
Yes.
if an airport, if like a big company thinks that this is acceptable, and like I honestly don't think like they were coming at it from an angle of like, let's rip off artists. I think they just thought, oh, this is an opportunity, and like this is exposure. And that's another thing I would like to educate people on, is the word exposure and what it actually means and what it doesn't mean. Because it doesn't just mean, oh, there might be some people around and that's exposure. It's like, no, it has to be a very intentional environment for it to be considered exposure,
Yeah.
like a showcase for industry people. So yeah, it's just, to me, I'm like, this seems like a no-brainer, guys. Like, how did you think this was acceptable? But clearly it's just people who are so out of touch because everyone's been so desensitized to like what being a musician is, or that it's an actual job. And then you will have musicians go and play these things, because you do have a certain type of musician that's like, oh, I have a day job. I just want to do this for fun, or whatever. But it's still undercutting those of us who are trying to make a go of it.
Well, and I think it's kind of telling if they're comparing it to like other vendors that they're having in the airport, that they're kind of seeing it. They're not, even if they're seeing it in some ways as a professional activity, they're not really understanding that it's a different kind of thing than
Yeah,
those, and that it works just in a completely different way.
totally. And I mean, that was kind of like recycled information. I didn't hear this like firsthand, but it was kind of, this is, I don't know. I could see them saying something like that.
Right.
Yeah, in my view, like that is the clearest case of what it is. I mean, they are like you're coming into a place of business that's, a ticketed place inside the airport, inside the security. Public can't be there. I mean, if you are just creating a deal basically with the airport to come in here and sell your wares, then it is kind of a pop-up shop they are kind of setting up for you,
Hmm.
and that's not a good, not great for a businessman to do, in the sense of entertainment, because we are saying that this entertainment has no value, and the only value is in the actual selling of physical products and t-shirts, that's, in t-shirts or records. There's no
Hmm.
value. We're not assigning any value to the live music.
That's a great point.
And I think that's where we're running into an issue on the industry level, where we're starting to say, it's actually fine to assign no value to live music,
Hmm.
and we're assigning absolutely no value to this at all. We're saying the value here is you use the live music, to sell some stickers or to sell some merchandise, and somehow as a small business person, you have to be able to front the money for the merchandise,
Yeah,
which I think
totally.
is going to be, very difficult for many artists that are, just coming out of university. They're just they're already in debt potentially. How are they supposed to come up with money for funding? The banks aren't going to listen to you, certainly as an independent artist, just be like, I have an amazing product here, I need $10,000 loan so I can get some merchandise so I can sell at the airport. I mean, they're going to laugh at you, right? This is
Yeah.
kind of well known, right? So we need a system that is going to work for the arts community and develop some real capital for the industry side. And I think in my view at least, we're done essentially if we're valuing live music potentially zero. If we're saying, hey, the live music, the floor is zero, and you need to have to prove yourself, whether it's from your social media stats or your ability to sell merch, that gives some value to the music now, instead of just inherently having some value. If you hire the worst carpenter to come to your place, you can't give them zero, right? And now we're saying in music, if you're just starting out, you're worth zero. And I think that, in my opinion, that's inherently wrong, and that devalues the entire industry.
Yeah,
But
I totally agree.
I don't think we have an agreement here, at least on the Canadian industry side. The conversations I've had, it's valid to do this type of practice where we're assigning a value of zero, which kind of harkens us back to like the age of the jester, and you kind of have to prove yourself to the king. And I feel like we are kind of back in that kind of economy where you're letting the castle gates if if Spotify allows you to be on their presence, or if TikTok is gonna boost your algorithm for you, or if EIA is gonna let you in their gates to sell your wares.
Yeah.
So I'm Kessler, go ahead, man.
No, I'm curious, based on that comment, do you think like Edmonton International Airport is kind of like a contributor to the bigger issues going on in the same way that like Spotify and like I guess what I mean is Edmonton International Airport kind of their role in this as a smaller, more local player? I still agree that they're pretty big, in the local scale of things, but are they like, I'm wondering about how much agency they have, or even like what they would have thought of doing in the context of a much larger economy with a lot bigger movements and issues going on. And I don't think that excuses them from doing practices like this. And in some ways, it's reassuring that they can kind of turn on their heel so quickly and change it. But yeah, I guess, what do you think at that more local level can be done or should be done?
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is that they responded quite well to this. Like, it's like it's kind of obvious that they would do this. I mean, it's such a minimal thing to. We're talking about like maybe like what's the investment they're going to be putting in? It's not a huge investment. We're talking about at least a multi-million-dollar corporation. So we're not talking about a massive investment they're going to have to be making here just to kind of save face. But I think at the end of the day, they're partnering with the industry partners. They're partnering with the industry partners to get the people to apply. It's through a platform, a locally based platform that's funded by Factor. It's funded by the major kind of players in the industry. So obviously they're not getting any pushback from this at all. They're not, so that's probably why they think, hey, this is the industry is not, they haven't been pushing back on this for years and years.
Yeah.
So we gotta try to make some cost savings. So we're gonna cost save now. We're not gonna give them the gift card this time. We're gonna that's kind of what a corporation is gonna do in general, right? They're gonna try to cost save. They're gonna look for the path of least resistance. So I mean, it's a small victory. I think that this is VISSIA was able to get them to move on this issue, and clearly the popular response was overwhelming. But I think to the major issue, it's like, if the industry itself is essentially in favor of this, you're going to continue to see corporations like this do this, I expect.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the one thing, like, I think, like, yeah, the EIA, obviously they were like, uh-oh, we gotta take care of this and save face. And they probably also were like, seems like this is a valid point considering like the uproar it's causing. Because like, I think like the only reason why they really moved on it is it's not because of like my one tweet. It's because everyone else amplified it and agreed with me, and we're like, we all agree that this is unacceptable. Um, but like I called out a number of like the organizations online too to ask them what their stance was, and nobody responded whatsoever. And I do plan to push a little harder on that still. I'm just letting it breathe a bit. But you know, like even Alberta music or like West Anthem or anything like that, like should be silent about this kind of thing. It's like this is kind of your wheelhouse, guys. Like it's important that we hear from you. So at least that's my opinion.
Well, yeah, actually, I'm also curious, like from your perspective now. I mean, not to say that this is all, that the dust has settled or anything. Like maybe it still feels like it's kind of happening. But do you feel like the way this has gone, do you feel like that you were successful at least in your response, or that this is kind of something that artists can do and use either, I don't know, social media activism or at least public support as a way to kind of
Mm-hmm.
speak back to these organizations and things like that, when it does seem like there's some kind of mismatch between what they are wanting, what they are presenting, and what people need?
You mean organizations like the music ones, or mean like EIA?
Oh yeah, okay. I guess maybe that's two separate questions then. Yeah. Like okay, to put it differently, do you think that there should be more discussions going on with organizations like arts funding organizations and larger, associations
Mm-hmm.
and funding bodies?
Yeah, like I think that they need to be more part of the conversation and the discussions when it comes to things like this EIA sort of program, because like that program's been running for years and years, and like nobody's really put pressure on them to change it. I mean, it is like encouraging, I think, to see now with the age of social media. I mean, Twitter specifically, honestly, like if you want to get like some media work done and media coverage, Twitter is where you go. Um, but it was definitely encouraging to feel like, oh, okay, I have enough ties within this community and like outside of it even, like, and it just like once you get enough eyes on it, it just kind of starts to snowball a little bit, and then more and more people see it. So I mean, in that way, it's kind of a great tool for good. um, but like, in terms of artists speaking up and asking more from these music industry associations, I mean, that's another thing too, is like, I don't think we can really expect them to do anything unless we kind of ask them to do things more explicitly, maybe. Like, I think that a lot of times, though, because a lot of opportunities come through these associations and organizations, people are very hesitant to say anything or to ask for things because they don't want to be, blacklisted from getting opportunities, because it is very small. The communities are very small. It's very political. It's very bureaucratic. And so, like, I understand why artists wouldn't want to put themselves out there. Um, but I think it's important because I don't know, I just feel like we could be doing so much more to create a sustainable, like actually to have like a future in this industry. But a lot of times it just seems like these organizations are so preoccupied with like exporting and stuff and like other activities where it's just like, okay, but like where are our roots? Like where is the soil that's gonna like grow all these things, I just don't think it's like, I don't think we've really
Mm-hmm.
have like a very healthy ecosystem for that, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I personally agree with that. And I think from my experience dealing, kind of from the industry side of it and dealing with, with the bureaucracies, we are in a situation where I think a lot of the strategies no longer work, and I think the governmental organizations, are obviously just going to be slow to move on from the old
Yeah.
systems, slow to move on from the old systems, you know, um, and they're also not necessarily set up to be very, they aren't necessarily there to help the artists. I think this is kind of a kind of a potentially a misconception. It's like the industry there is to support the industry,
Yeah.
and even if we think about Factor, I mean, the Foundation to Assist Canadian Talent on Recordings, I mean, that's what Factor means, but they're not really there to support the Canadian talent. They're still there to support the companies that represent the Canadian talent, and so it's kind of a bit of a newspeak kind of situation now where we're in, where I think the public is under the understanding that these organizations are there to help, the local artists, but if you look at the fine print, I mean, it's really not there. And then I think, in this case, when we're talking about, an issue, and it becomes really a popular issue, and everyone in the many people in the Canadian music industry are starting to talk about it, and then you have deafening silence from these people. It's almost telling. It's either telling that maybe they don't have the capacity to see it or respond to it, but at very least, it's not really on their radar at all. So that's, I think,
Mm-hmm.
interesting from my perspective, when we've devalued music to the point where it's legitimately fair to not pay people in this kind of situation.
Yeah, I think the comment about these things not being on their radar is probably very apt, because it's just like, that's what it feels like anyway. It seems like they've just got different agendas going on, where like this kind of issue just isn't even like, penciled in anywhere.
Mm.
I'm also curious, VISSIA, in the sorry, I don't mean to bring it back to just this unique case, but with the
Oh, it's all
EIA,
good. Mhm.
did you get like did most of the initial support come from other musicians and other artists, or was there kind of a broader thing, or did it kind of start out mostly art in the arts community and then kind of become bigger in terms of your tweets and statements and things?
Yeah.
I'm not even on Twitter, so I'm not aware of
Fair.
what goes on, but
Yeah. I honestly think like there are an equal number of people like who aren't musicians and artists as people who were. A lot of people who are just maybe on the periphery of the music industry, or else like people who genuinely want to support arts and music. People who just want to help build community. So yeah, it seemed like, for every couple artists or musicians who were retweeting or sharing it elsewhere, that there was, at least like one other person that's not a musician or artist sharing it. So it was kind of nice to see that, actually, because it gives you a little bit of hope, where you're like, oh, okay, it's not like we're just fighting for what we think we deserve. It's, there are people who agree. So that's good. It's just, you're always going to have a couple trolls in the mix that you got to put on mute. But there just comes a point in time where it's not really effective or like productive to engage with certain people, because they don't want to have a discussion. They just want to spew what they think, and they're not going to change their mind.
Right.
But
What is
yeah.
the counter argument here? Like, is there a counter argument that is to be considered at all? Like that was at least expressed, or
I mean, not really. I mean, there was like one person from somewhere like in New Brunswick who was trolling me a bit, for example, and I can't remember what was his argument about it. Something like how he figures the airport is like, giving musicians the opportunity, and the airport doesn't really need them, and the airport, like, we're not really, like, musicians aren't really making the airport like a better place necessarily, like, and plus, like, oh, you have a captive audience, so like that's worth something. And I was just kind of like, well, man, I don't think you've ever busked before. I don't know if you know what the vibe is. because oftentimes people really aren't paying attention to you and you're just background, and you might be lucky if someone acknowledges you and actually looks you in the face. I mean, at least that's been my experience, but not that I've done a lot of busking. But yeah, I don't know. I found that, he was one of those people who needed to like quote the dictionary, like what captive means. And because as soon as I was like, man, I don't think you busted before, he's like, well, here's the definition for captive. And I was like, okay, we're done here. Like, as soon as someone starts like pasting definitions in there, I'm like, we are not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kessler.
Oh, no. Well, sure. I was just going to, I was going to say also, this makes me wonder too, like, I don't know, because to me, the subtext of EIA looking for performers and trying to build this list, in my understanding of it, of regular performers, is my implicit understanding would be that they're looking for like professionals for it, right? They're looking for
Right.
people who can come and already have a thing and already, can just do their own thing properly.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of like any kind of counter arguments about, oh, this is an opportunity or whatever, like maybe if I could see a world where if they're marketing it as like a thing for students or something, as like
Yeah.
a way to do something, but that doesn't seem to me at all like how it's coming across.
No, I mean, especially considering like you very much need a driver's license to get there. But no, I totally agree. And like I think like I don't think like the airport's gonna want anything less than like a professional in there, because you want people that kind of, yeah, have their shit together, have their thing going, be like of a certain quality. Otherwise, I don't think like customers are maybe gonna enjoy it as much. But like everyone needs to start somewhere, and if the airport was like, oh, we're gonna do this for, you know, um, younger musicians who just, don't have a lot of experience, or like, something like that. I mean, as long as they're like communicating that that's what it is, that's one thing. Because like all of us have started out playing for basically nothing, or for $20 or something. But even so, like I don't even agree with like fully playing for free for something like that. Like I think they could still shell out like a $50 honorarium or something like that. Like it's not very much money, and I don't know. I just think it's like so important to have a value on live music, like regardless, pretty much. Unless like, okay, unless it is truly like someone who's never played a gig in their life, and they're just, obviously just don't really have it together yet. But the more that we let people just play for free, or like the more people accept those kinds of things, the harder it is to get money out of anything, like for the live music portion of what we do. And like that's like the whole point. It's like you have to be able to play music, and like, yeah, I don't know. It's troublesome.
Yeah, I agree because I think from the musician perspective and from my perspective at least, what we're really trying to do from the artists and kind of our generation of artists, we're just trying to be able to keep on doing music and keep on doing
Mm,
our thing that is our life. And we have this set of circumstances, in this system that we've inherited and we just live in, right? We live in this system where you need money to be able to eat so you can continue to live. And it's really basic, but if there was a way, for musicians to come in and talk to the bank and get a bank loan, then I could see the argument for, okay, well, you need to take 5 years and you need to do all these free gigs, and you need to, lose money because you believe in your business. But that's frankly impossible. The system doesn't allow for that, right? So
mhm,
you either need to, somehow have an inheritance or something to be able to, you know, build your business. And the Canadian system doesn't allow for that. And if we're deciding, okay, music inherently has a value of zero, then professional music, where you go on a platform and you apply and it's a competitive process, and these platforms, are funded by the Canadian government and the Alberta
mhm.
governments, and this is the system that we collectively decide is the way to do it. then I just don't understand how we think that's a sustainable solution to actually providing, world-class musicianship. And, when people fly into Edmonton per se, and they, view our musicians, that we're showing them, hey, this is a great place to be. This is a great cultural environment. It's like right now, pre-pandemic, there were great musicians that did show up to, do the airport show. And, I think in our view, it's a bit of exploitative on the
Mhm.
artist, but they had the ability to sell some music and sell some wares. But are they now 3 years later having a successful career? I'm not sure, right? So we need to build a
Yeah.
system that allows people to generate the potential to grow a business, and I don't see that happening at all. So I'm just curious if there's any solutions we could consider to develop, even within our own company here.
Yeah. I mean, I think like, yeah, just the fact that as musicians, it's very hard to be taken seriously. Like, you're mentioning banks and stuff, and it's like, yeah, it's a prime example where they don't take you seriously because, it's like essentially every artist or musician is a small business. Um, that's what it is. But we don't have access to the same resources as small businesses.
Definitely not.
Um, and I think like, I mean, even with like the funding bodies that we have access to, which is not ever guaranteed, but and they have a lot of faults there with those processes. But it's like it's kind of like they've been doing the same things for so long, like nothing has changed in terms of like what's being offered or what's like acceptable as like you can't really apply for funding from like a small business standpoint, really. It's like you can get like an album funded and all of that, but it's like, okay, well, what good is an album to me if like I can't sustainably, push this giant rock up the hill, like I don't know. It's like if I can't get enough food energy to do that, like like literally. So yeah, I think it's just like I don't know how you make those changes and like re-educate people in all those different facets. It's like it just seems like there's just a huge disconnect about what it actually means to be an artist and be a musician and like what people perceive it to be, like yeah. I don't know. I didn't really answer your question at all. I just kind of added to the
No, that's good. Kessler, what do you think, man? Especially around the musicology angle. Like, I wonder if you have any knowledge around just the history of music and I guess commerce even,
Sure. Well, I will make an academic caveat that I'm not an expert on that, but I'm happy to. Yeah, I mean, I find it interesting. One thing that I've been thinking, I guess, a little bit throughout the whole conversation is about. Well, actually, no. From the moment, VISSIA, that you brought up the union,
Mhm.
that kind of got me thinking um about like the pros and cons, I guess, of organizing as artists on a larger scale to promote mutually agreed upon or mutually beneficial uh, terms, for lack of a better word,
Mhm.
of engaging in contracts for performance or recording or whatever sort of musical services that that I know that in Alberta that there had been a stronger presence of music unions uh, during the later part of the 20th century, like the post World War II era. I think even up until like the later 1900s, there had been a lot more strong presence of the union, and I know there were some negatives of that centralization of power. That because of the regulation, if you weren't a union member, for example, it was a lot harder to kind of get into the scene and get a part of things, and it was a lot more centralized control that way. but on the other hand, because they weren't a corporation that was just making decisions with a bigger eye towards profit or like cost cutting, like you said before, and things like that. And they're, at least on the face of it, supposed to be advocating for musicians to venues and businesses and other organizations and things. I think like that's always been something I've kind of thought of, is like as something you mentioned too before, Nick, that like the industry is changing fast. So I don't think like going back to an older model and kind of just saying, oh yeah, this is how we dealt with big venues and record companies and the film and radio industry, is having these unions. Like I don't know if setting up the exact same kind of unions before would fix it at this point, but I wonder whether some kind of like it seems to me that we're at a low point in terms of like centralized organization in terms of artists, from my young limited perspective. And I wonder whether there is room for a new kind of organization on like speaking on advocating for artists that could kind of match the way that the industry and the economy is moving towards.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see that, like, and how that could work out. Like I know, definitely in my perspective, like the way the the AFM style, the union is operating is, again, just very out of touch. You know, you know, and I think the key thing that in my dealings with the union is they don't see every issue as being the same. They see some issues being kind of an employee-employer relationship, and that's where they feel, okay, now we can step in as the union. And then they see some instances where it's like, oh, this is not a hiring situation. Interestingly enough, like I got, during the pandemic, the union reached out to me and they said, hey, we want you to come to our online party and sing a song to start the event. And I said, okay, amazing. Like, send me over the contract. I'm doing a public performance for your guys's union party. And then they said, oh no, this is an unpaid opportunity. You misunderstood this opportunity.
Wow.
So we have the union here, coming to me, and essentially that, they were looking for me to get involved in the union. They wanted me to kind of get involved. They thought this was a good strategy for me to, get involved in the union. It obviously backfired on them because, I was against anything like this. And I tried to, explain to them. I tried to educate the union, be like, yo, like for me to come and do a performance for you guys, I need to have access to a lot of equipment so I can do a live stream performance. It's actually, it's not just a given that I have access to this. And plus I'm doing this to a professional audience, which means the stakes are rather high. So, it really was quite, it shocked me that they didn't understand that this is an issue. And it's like, if somebody is volunteering for a union party and there's some music there that's happening in a, basically a private online event through Zoom, I mean, that's not an issue, of course. But the issue is, kind of reaching out to somebody that's a member of this union that has never, I've never attended a single one of these events before. And then, they're trying to get me to perform. And I think the optics there were missed. But again, it's like the fact that you think this is legitimate is concerning to me beyond reproach, where we do seem like we've totally lost perspective of what a live performance is, what a service is, when is it appropriate, why is it appropriate to do an online event here for your party when if the firemen's union approached me to do the same thing, maybe I'm part of the firemen's union, maybe I'm a volunteer firefighter, is that okay now for me to perform free for the firefighters party? I would say no. I'm a professional musician. Like, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to perform live for any private party.
I honestly think like this is such like a music industry problem, because like I've been hired by, like, let's say like the Writers Guild of Alberta to do their online Christmas party, and it was very much paid. It was like, come play 3 songs, we'll pay you X amount of dollars. They invited me to do it again in person this year, and I unfortunately wasn't able to do it. But like, it's like there's people who get it, that it's like, oh, artists I mean, these are other artists, they're writers, but like they are like, okay, yeah, of course she should get paid. But then for like our own like union to be like, no, it's not paid. You just have to come volunteer. Like, come on, like what is happening? Like, I don't understand that at all.
But yeah, I do think like the function of the unions, again, at least in Alberta, but it seems maybe it's kind of a wider issue, have like changed significantly in like the past few decades. That they used to like do a lot of things, and I've noticed like almost every Edmonton or Alberta musician I've talked to in the past, I don't know how many years that I've occasionally had conversations about this. Most of them say, "Oh, I don't even think about the union. I never engage with the union." Or the few who do are like, "Oh, when I play with the symphony or like very specific
Yeah,
kinds of
exactly.
things, it's useful." But like hardly anybody even talks about it or thinks about it anymore.
No, because I think it's just like not like what they do most of the time. It doesn't feel as relevant to us because of like the nature of the work of playing like not classical music. It's like if you're playing in the symphony, it's like you're actually getting paid union fees. Whereas like here it's like playing, in an indie rock band or like a pop group or like a folk singer song or like anything that's more contemporary and not classical. It's like you have tons and tons of like festivals trying to like book like full bands for like $150 for like opening slots and stuff. And it's like, man, the union would not be behind that. Like they're not gonna think that that's a reasonable fee. But like they're not like they can't really. What are they gonna do about that? I guess, or they haven't done anything about it. Um, like I personally push back on festivals like that, and I don't get asked to play them anymore, and so that's fine. But I'm like, no, man, I'm not gonna bring myself or anyone else for like $150. Like that's just and those the thing is too is like fees haven't changed in like 10 years. Like it's been like the same. And your rising cost of living and everything else changes and everyone else gets paid more and like music is just it hasn't changed.
Yeah, and that's super interesting to me. And I think to me again, the core issue is we're just we got to be thinking about this in terms of capital, where it's like
Yeah.
it's not unreasonable that a festival would say to an artist, hey, like we got this slot for you. There's 10,000 people here, and you're gonna play before this well-known band that we probably sold
Mhm.
5,000 tickets for this act, and you're gonna come here. We got $150 for you. And for any, I mean, as a manager, I would say, yeah, that's potentially a good deal for the artist. But we
Yeah.
have to be doing this in a situation, basically in a society where small businesses can have access to capital, and you can like any business here can access any business can have access to capital based on certain things. But and based in the music industry, you should be basing your ability to generate revenue on your IP, and that should be the main thing that you're going to generate revenue over.
Hmm.
But if we have a situation, which we do right now, where the federal government through the funding agencies are essentially blocking artists from starting small businesses based on their IP. It's like, for the instance, in Alberta right now, if 10 artists came together and started a record label, hey, we're going to start a record label, we have $1 million of money, that we self-funded, and here's our plan, and we're going to hire these people, and we're going to all own 10, each one of these shareholders is going to own 10% of the company. Then Alberta would go back to you and say, oh, you're not eligible for funding via Alberta Media Fund because you're the people that created the IP. So we have a system now where the creators of IP in music are essentially blocked from entering the market in Canada. This is definitely the case in Alberta, and I'd say it's very similar with the factor rules, which are a
Hmm.
little bit different on factor rules. But I'm curious, Kessler, do you know anything around, a situation where we're talking about people who've created IP and then being essentially blocked by the government policy to, enter the market?
Yeah, I will. Okay, I will say that I don't actually have a very solid like picture of some of the legal history around intellectual property, but I mean, what the impression that I do have generally though is that it's always been there's always been issues with the way that the legal structures in at least in North America are set up around intellectual property versus how people tend to actually operate and how the industries tend to operate. And in my understanding, part of that's because of lobbies of larger record companies and things like that historically that have been able to kind of, push forward their own ideas of how things should go. And if they have a clear plan and a structure for how something could work, that can have an impact. And I don't know like actually how much influence or lobbying there was or what exactly happened, but my impression for sure is that like those larger industry interests have like over time basically continuously promoted things that are in their interests more than in the smaller players that they're working with, which tends to be the people generating the intellectual property. Um, and AI and like all of kind of the things that have come up recently that I definitely seems like as with the out of touchness in general that like we're not even at a stage yet where we're ready to talk about those things or figure out how those work because the previous way that things work still wasn't. I don't know. So that's my take. Again, I don't know a ton about it, but
Yeah, no, that's great. That's super interesting to me. Like, yeah, because it is curious just around the idea of like even creating intellectual property and from a stance of, okay, here's a corporation and we've created this IP, the corporation owns the IP. I'm not really even understanding how that differentiates between the individuals, who actually created that IP. And of course, when we're talking about publishing, there's some protections in place that the industry has created where it's like, essentially 50% of the money to publishing has to go to the writers, and that's a protection to protect humans from corporations essentially. I don't think anything like that exists on the master side, on the record label side, where the record label can clearly own 100% of all. They could capitalize 100% on the IP. And from my perspective, that's totally fine. I'm just interested around the fact that the government essentially is feeling that they can block certain Canadian individuals from owning companies based on the fact that they've created IP.
yeah, that is an interesting phenomenon. I will also say though that in my understanding, there's because of the fact that like publishing was done with like written, scores and written music before
Mm-hmm.
recordings, and even before recordings were really a thing largely in society. That the way that intellectual property law has been structured has been kind of what started out largely based on written things in general, and so I don't know enough to actually make a comment, but my impression is that when you start dealing with like recorded audio and things like that as intellectual property, for example, or even non-recorded audio is more complicated. Like if you say, I wrote this song, but I never wrote it down and I've never recorded it or something like that. And I know that, maybe I'm getting into all sorts of different directions there, but regardless that the starting point was for written something you can prove I wrote this and I signed my name and these are the notes that are on the page and those are that's the property is what can be represented here. That like even some of those structures were kind of set up in ways that the way the music industry has evolved since then have had to kind of adapt retroactively to kind of fit within that model. Again, I don't know about the Canadian context of like not of somebody who owns intellectual property not being able to, I don't know, get like not having access to certain legal things that as a corporation or something else you would. That does seem like an odd, for sure, an odd thing, and something if that is unique to the Canadian system, that's, I don't know, pretty weird, and weird that it isn't talked about more. Also, like a lot of these things, that's part of it to me too. Is it's weird that it doesn't seem like these are things that people are super aware of or talk about a lot.
Yeah, in the Canadian context, in my understanding, these are kind of new rules that have been put in. I think
Oh,
since we've seen the rise of kind of what they're quoting as artist entrepreneurs. There's this new term that's been kind of invented in my view, artist entrepreneur. That's kind of creating a different class of entrepreneur. Hey, you're an artist entrepreneur, or you're just an entrepreneur. Which frankly, I don't understand how that kind of lines up to a human rights perspective. But they are creating this different class of creator that's called the artist entrepreneur, and they're basically saying, hey, if you're an artist entrepreneur, you're not eligible for certain basically grants from the federal or provincial governments, and these grants are basically needed to compete in the market, right? Like we're seeing companies receiving upwards of $1 million from the federal government per year to run their companies, to help run their companies. And then you have artist entrepreneurs that are trying to compete in the same marketplace and getting essentially zero funding, or these very difficult programs that are not sustainable and take very long to even hear back if you've been approved or not, in a sense. And in our perspective, they're very difficult to actually build an artist strategy around, even though of course money's good in this world. But so that, yeah, I think to me that's the interesting thing that I would love to find a solution for in Canada, is just to realize, okay, why is there a difference here between creators that, okay, you've created this intellectual property, or you're quote unquote an artist entrepreneur, or you have 10 different artist entrepreneurs and you're building a company together. Why does the government think that's not suitable to invest in? And also, what track records have we, just as a Canadian citizen, it's like, what track records are the legacy labels showing us that they're developing the next generation of Canadian musicians? I think they are doing that. I mean, I think companies like our company is doing that. There's plenty of young companies like our company. So
well, that's just the thing now, though, too, is like, it just seems like they don't understand like how music companies are being made now, because it's like, this is how they're being made. It's like, it's a like-minded group of like artists, really, who like, we've all just learned how to diversify our skill sets, and so we've had to learn like all different facets of the business outside of just the art form, and just like in terms of just how things are, like, it just makes so much sense to do it that way, and like, because you don't have the same income streams for music that we did like 20 years ago, and like we're having to like reinvent it constantly, like it's constantly changing. I don't know, it just seems like the government organizations and funding bodies like very rarely have people who have experience in music and in the industry. Like, they literally know nothing, and so that's why you get these arbitrary rules. I mean, it seems pretty arbitrary to me. It's like, what are your reasons for not allowing companies that are formed by artists who like own their own IP and stuff? Like, what are the reasons behind that, other than like, okay, is it just because you're like in cahoots with these other companies? Like, I don't know, like, what's going on?
yeah, I mean, in my perspective, it's likely it's either a nonsensical strategy, or it's a strategy to limit the competition in the marketplace, right? So to me, if you're looking to limit the amount of potential music companies in the Canadian marketplace, then that would be a decent strategy, because you're going to have a lot of these companies that are going to be quote unquote artist entrepreneur companies, because those are the people engaged in the market. So if you're looking to, say, drastically reduce the amount of companies that can compete, I think that would be a good strategy. Although I would argue that you're going to have companies then that are competing that aren't able to produce competitive products. And in my view, that's what we're seeing in Canada, is we're seeing a really major lack of competitive products on the marketplace, from these legacy companies.
Yeah, I think it's just because these legacy companies have just become comfortable because they can get access to the funding, and then there's not really like, it's kind of like, oh, let's just do whatever feels safe, and then we can just keep existing, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I guess, and I think I went off a little bit into hyperspace with my previous rant. I don't know if it was actually relevant to some of this, but I think that the thing about like the record companies having such powerful lobbying ability to governments does play a role here, and not just because necessarily it's like this nefarious conspiracy where they're like, I don't know, constantly trying to, have the puppets of the law and the legal system and funding organizations. I don't think that necessarily, or that any person is like out there thinking like, oh yes, maybe there is somebody who's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna own all the arts, everything. But I think like a bigger issue is this, yeah, that safety of like, oh, this is kind of how things works, and we've got these big enough organizations and record companies and publishing systems and structures that it would take something really like fundamental to like topple those over. So as long as we keep applying like band-aids as things slowly change to the systems and like trying to keep things as close to how they work as they can, then it like takes like something really really fundamental to like throw everything off, and then suddenly like everything explodes and nothing works anymore, and everybody's left out, and there's no preparation for like the new way things are.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Yeah, it's a worrying trend if there are changes being made, but those changes are kind of helping maintain the status quo. To me, that's a worrying.
Mhm. Yeah, I like the Band-Aid analogy. That's totally what it kind of feels like. It's just,
Yes, super well said. I absolutely like that. That does seem like the situation to me, like from how what I've seen and like kind of these new policies that are coming out. Um, that it does seem to kind of be like, oh, like we need to protect what's there. Which it's not that it's not a valid perspective, but it's like we need to. I mean, that's not really how innovation works. I mean, I
no.
think we know how innovation works as a society. We know that you need to increase competition in a marketplace, especially and make it more possible for new startup companies to enter the marketplace. If the only purpose of that is for those companies to essentially fail, to keep the large companies to be forced to create good products. I mean, on a macro scale, to me, that's great policy. But or these large companies, they see these small companies and they, oh, these people are entering the marketplace, they're competitive, let's buy them up, or let's have strategies to keep us competitive. Where I personally don't think that's happening, and we're actually just seeing kind of a dampening of competition. But it may be due to lobbying, or maybe due to just kind of an unawareness of actually how the system works. But yeah, I would love to jump back to talk about kind of your journey as an art as a quote unquote artist entrepreneur here, and just kind of diving back into maybe how what are the things that we need to do as an industry. And I guess, full disclosure, obviously we are in a exclusive agreement with VISSIA, like my company, like we represent VISSIA here. So
Mhm.
um what do we need to do as an industry to make it possible for artists like you to have a future in music, and to develop competitive business, and to you know essentially compete on the world scale? And because we know that music has the ability to generate massive amounts of profits,
Mhm.
we see this constantly. But how do we build a system that allows people to come from very grassroots situations like yourself, and develop world competitive products?
Well, that's a big question.
Even like the first step, because I think the question around live is so key, because like you got to develop an amazing live show. We know that
Yeah,
from a record label perspective,
yeah.
but you're not going to generate revenue. Or it's going to be very very difficult to generate revenue as an artist on your IP until you've really developed a solid business. And it might take a decade, you know, kind of in the current climate. It might take us a decade to be profitable, say,
Mhm.
on a new product. So how do you bridge that gap? Like what is needed from your perspective to make it possible?
UBI. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Like honestly, I think some sort of UBI for artists or
yeah,
in
I
general,
totally
like
agree.
I actually think that would be just life changing. Like when I was able to collect CERB, I was able to work full time on my project, and like the amount of like strides I was able to take just because of that is just like unlike any other year for me in my career. You know, like I started my solo career in 2011. And you know, over time I've grown a lot as a person and figured out, oh, you really need to like focus in on the one thing that you want to be doing, because if you're spreading yourself too thin, trying to do too many projects, too many things, it doesn't really work. But yeah, it's like right now it's just like I think like the financial side of things is like the hugest hurdle. It's like how do you spend enough time on your business when you have to be hustling other things. And I mean, like, I know this is the case in many industries. And so I get it that, you know, being a musician, maybe we're not so special or anything, but from the musician standpoint and from an artist entrepreneur standpoint, it's like I'm constantly reinvesting in my career, like every day. Um, Even when I was on CERB, like so much of that money, I was like, okay, I can afford to like do this music video at home, or like you know, all these things where just the money gets reinvested constantly, and it's really hard to come out um in a and feel like you're in a position where you can really like keep moving forward, because it's just like a very stressful, precarious place to be. um and you know, like I've been very lucky to receive funding from different funding bodies too, which is great. But I mean, that's not, I don't know, like it's not really like you're not getting funded like as a business per se. Like it's very project based, right? So it's like your project that you're doing gets funded, but it's not really like, you know, those are for specific things, for specific activities. So I don't know. It'd be great to just have some sort of. I am speaking very much from the funding and financial side, but I think that is like the biggest thing in the way for most artist entrepreneurs. And like, yeah, I don't know how we fix that or like try to mitigate that necessarily.
Yeah. So would you agree that you know the key issue with the way the grant system works is that they're all very short term, and
Hmm.
that would you agree that like something like a UBI where you know you're getting a basic amount of money per month, and
Yeah,
it's just for
like
living expenses, but you
like what
just
if you
know
could?
that.
What if you? Yeah, like what if you could apply for a grant that basically is UBI, but it's for like, okay, you get this for the next 12 months or whatever, or however long it is.
Yeah,
But they're like,
I would agree. I would say longer. I'd say five
I would
years. Like,
I would say longer too. And you know, it's like it's totally reasonable to have like a yearly like check-in or something, or like, you know, some sort of like on the, you know, you're having to maybe submit some sort of reporting as you go. Because I
mhm.
understand they're gonna want to be like, okay, well, we want to see how you're doing. At the same time, I think it can be hard to measure, because it's like every business is different, right? Like any small business. It's like some people are just like, you know, yeah, they work at it for 10 years before they really hit their stride where they're like, oh, now I've got the income stream, the cash flow, it's coming. Now I don't need that support anymore. Because I mean, the thing with the granting system is like it's built this, it's like it's created this dependency. But at the same time, like you're saying, I think it is, these are very short-term grants. Like Canada Council is the only one that really has like longer term type stuff available, and even then, it's not long term in the sense of a business plan. Like you know, it's just like it's so small. It's like, but a lot of times with these, especially like smaller granting bodies, like the juries themselves don't understand what's reasonable. Like I've been part of projects that applied for recording funding, and some feedback was they thought that 2 weeks recording in the studio was a bit long. Like you have people that just have no clue, right? And they're actually like adjudicating these things. And
Mhm.
so I don't know, there's even at that level too, because it's like, okay, who's getting the funding? What are why. But honestly, if we had like some sort of program that you could apply for that was essentially UBI, where it's just like a monthly subsidy that's like, here you go, here's your $2,000 or whatever it is. And not saying that, artists wouldn't, I don't think they should say artists can't, make income. Like the point is to make income if it's like an artist entrepreneur type thing. If it's for, you want to run your business, like you want to be able to sustain yourself and then be able to be like, okay, I don't need you anymore, UBI, but thank you so much. But yeah, something like that would be incredible. And I think it would change the entire landscape, because like we know so many people doing very similar things as your company, and doing amazing things, like creating like amazing music and content, and they have these great ideas and like new ideas, and and even like crossing different mediums of like expression. And it's like you just don't have a hope in hell though unless you have some sort of funding and some sort of financial support. And so then a lot of these things just fizzle out because it's like, man, I just can't, how am I supposed to feasibly keep doing this? Got bills to pay, rent to pay, whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, I basically totally agree with what you're saying. I think for perspective, so people can understand, like kind of the major grant that say an artist like VISSIA, if VISSIA was independent, would be eligible for is the Factor JSR kind of grant. And essentially at the top end, you're looking at $75,000 Canadian for the project to kind of support you. And there's all sorts of rules, and you have to spend quite a bit of money to be eligible for that. But if we're just looking at the investment of say $75,000 towards an artist project, in my view, you could spread that over 5 years. Then we're looking at, I mean, I can't quite do the math, but we're looking at something like $12,000 or $13,000 per year, for an artist. And I think if we just wrote a check for an artist, $1,000 a month, $1,500 a month for 5 years to support a project, and maybe that has to be through a juried system, and maybe we keep the current horrible system, but then you're going to really see some activity, and give that straight to the artist. Give that straight to the artist.
I agree.
Companies need support, and that's a real thing. But if you give this straight to the artist, all of a sudden, I know as a record label guy that my artist is going to be able to eat. They're going to be able to think straight, and they're going to be able to work hard. And that's what we need. We don't need people that are barely functioning because they can't eat properly, or they can't pay their rent because their living situation and the current economic situation. Mm-hmm. We're not going to be creating great products, and there's no system of businesses really investing in the artists in Canada. I mean, unless you're a major label, there's really no companies that are investing major amounts of money into developing artists. Again, to try to put it in perspective, like there's what's called the Factor Wallet system, or I believe it's called the Factor Wallet. It's for kind of like the biggest kind of music companies that are non-major labels. So any kind of big indie, if you're aware of a big indie in Canada, they're probably on this Factor. I believe it's called the Wallet system. And they can get large amounts of money per year for this, but then Factor puts on the same kind of, these companies can choose to give their executives massive executive producer fees, or they can choose to invest in their artists, and that's part of the same wallet. So if you're a company, like if I'm a successful entrepreneur, and say now the company's doing really well, am I going to choose to take 15 grand, and am I going to choose to invest that into my new artist, or am I going to choose to get a summer home? I mean, mm-hmm. And this is the exact thing. I mean, you can look at this. They're allowing massive executive producer fee bonuses, and I don't know if that's actually happening in real life, but this is what's allowed. So
it's available. Like if it's available.
So why are we creating these rules, and why are we blocking other companies from really kind of competing with these companies? Because you have to have quite a large income to be available for these programs, which I think are quite favorable to these companies. in the end, no independent musicians or small record labels in Canada are eligible for, say, pressing physical products, pressing vinyl records. It's a major investment, but say these companies via this program can, essentially charge the government 50% of these fees. So then, how are we supposed to compete with the price of vinyl, when the large companies are getting half their vinyl paid by the government? So I think from my perspective, these are the main issues, but I would just love if we would just get into a system where we can really, give artists the basic things they need so they can create amazing products that will make millions of dollars. And we only need to have a couple successful artists from grassroots, which we know we've had in Canada. But what happens to a major artist when they become super successful? The money leaves Canada.
Yeah, they leave.
The money leaves Canada. None of our major artists that we consider Canadian, none of them are on Canadian labels.
No.
When we think of the biggest artists in Canada, that money's not remaining in Canada. So
no.
I would, if anyone from the government ever listens to me, like, I would say, let's make strategies where we force companies to keep the money in Canada. If you're going to give me money to build my company, if you're going to give this artist, then own a percentage of the IP. I mean, that I would say that would be totally fine, and maybe allow an ability to buy back, basically share buyback the IP. But that's like, let's think of this in a capital way, and let's not think of it as like these are handouts. No, these are legitimate businesses, and we need to create a system that actually makes us able to run these as legitimate businesses.
Well, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead, man. Absolutely.
No, I think that's I don't know. I think that's part of the issue too, though. And again, like, this is just a perpetual issue with big organizations and governments and things like that, is that, there's always like different things coexisting at the same time, and things are constantly in the state of flux. So it's hard to make like a structure or a system or a set of rules that'll kind of work in every case, or that will work, in the long term. But so like I feel like there's going to be perpetual problems, but I feel like there is this kind of disconnect between, on the one hand, viewing it in this super business entrepreneurial way, but on the other hand, like we talked about at the beginning, like not valuing live music as a thing worth capital. And also, again, this is, I think, somewhat uniquely Canadian, this kind of arts economy that's large, or like these arts perception of this Canadian arts world, and that we want to really, like, at least I think it's presented in a lot of ways as we want to keep Canadian art center stage, or we want to really support Canadian art. But the way that these organizations are set up, like Canada Council and things like that, are that they have an agenda, like that to an extent the government, or at least the organization, sets up that, like, these are the important things to us this year or whatever, or in the next little bit. And so it ends up not just being like, oh, we're supporting Canadian art in general, but we're kind of, as long as they fit within our agenda. So like, again, that the whole idea of it being a business or an entrepreneurial thing, or something that can kind of either grow naturally out in the world, or at least that somebody can bring their own vision to it and kind of see where that goes. It's kind of at odds with the way that system is set up, also in terms of funding and having these kind of centralized agendas and quotas, and like you're saying, also with like the reports or these project-based things where they want it as if it, I don't know. And not to say that there are, that having, like you said, having some kind of reporting or some kind of check-in process or accountability maybe has a place in a system like that. But I do think that the way that it's set up right now is like, it's, I don't know, it's at odds with itself. Like, to be an artist and kind of to try to fit within the funding model of these big public funding organizations, and the very kind of the agendas that they have, or like the specific things they're looking for, or to kind of try to do your own entrepreneurial thing and business thing, and do everything yourself, like that, you can't, it's very difficult to combine those things, because you need to fit into a very particular way of doing things either way. I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but that's I like the idea of a UBI though, and also of having like, even like you were saying, Nick, taking the same amount of funding as you could get for like a larger project grant now and spreading that across as like a business thing over a few years or something. Like that seems like a pretty straightforward, reasonable thing that wouldn't necessarily change the budget, and actually maybe would make it easier because, well, I don't know, but maybe in terms of like assess all the assessments and the juries and coming up with all of this like specific guidelines for every component of all of these different individual programs, that maybe having some kind of larger, more inclusive program that's not just project based would also make it easier. I don't know. Again, now I'm just speculating, but that seems like a cool and reasonable and doable, way to make some change at least.
Yeah, I think like, yeah, I think that would be just so great and important to do, because it's like from like a, I don't know, outside of business, outside of whatever, it's like, how do you become an artist? Like, how do you do that? It's like, it's through the practice of being able to work on your art. And it's like, if you are just constantly stressed out all the time and having to like pour your energy into all these other things, it's like you're not going to be a healthy individual. You're not going to be able to deliver on those projects. So even like a lot of times getting this project funding, like you can still be just like super stressed out, even though it's like, oh, I've got all this funding. That's awesome. I can go do this tour. I can make this album. But it's like, it's not like super necessarily like sustainable, because it's like, I think just like having like healthy humans is like how you are, like you basically empower them to, be the main force behind the projects. It's like you don't even then need to necessarily be like funding every project if like the person is able to like function. I don't know if that makes any sense to either of you, but just from more of a like, I guess, yeah, a health and like uh kind of spiritual philosophical standpoint, sort of, I guess.
Well,
Honestly.
and then if like something changes while you're doing the project, or so, like any kind of thing, it just makes it a lot more flexible too, in my
Yeah.
mind. I don't know.
Yeah, which is like so much more real life. It's like, because yeah, a lot of times you also submit for these projects, and it can be, depending on the granting body, like they can be very strict with like, well, no, you can't make those changes, or you need to submit to see if we approve them. Often they approve changes, I think, within reason pretty much all the time. Um but I think, yeah, just like it's giving artists like more agency, I guess, is you're not just like, oh, I'm depending on you so much for everything, because I mean that's not what the goal is. It's like the goal isn't to just have a system where artists need to rely on the system. But yeah, a lot of times with this project funding, like you get a lot of like artists who get project funding, but then nothing else really happens beyond the scope of that project even. And so sometimes it's like, okay, well, should they have gotten the funding then to do that if they're not interested in a career and like longevity and like going on to the next project? Like, do you want to be funding things where there's like 5 to 7 years in between? Like, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to come up with these standards and like ways of assessing, but like, there's only so much funding to go around. And like, if certain projects are getting funded that aren't really like, you've got someone who's got just like a full-time job, but then wants to do this on the side. Like, I don't know. I have a bit of issue with that, being an artist who's trying to, really like make a go of like this whole thing and want to do that full time and whatever that means. But I don't know. I kind of went off on a little tangent there, but
No, I think that's great. In my perspective, I think there is value in kind of separating out the difference between like a cultural grant, which would be like, AFA, Alberta Foundation for the Arts, or Canada Council is kind of the main one in Canada. I think the purpose of this is really to kind of showcase Canadian culture, or make it possible to increase Canadian culture, especially, in our difficult economic situation, where it's almost impossible to have a profitable local festival at your town of 10,000 people.
yes.
You can't really do that. It's financially impossible in the current capitalist system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that I think there's tons of value to those programs.
Mhm.
But with that being said, I would believe that, you know, the better way to do it would be to create a system where it's more friendly to artists as far as even what kind of art they're doing. Because we have a system where you have to basically tell these bodies, this is the art I'm proposing to do. And now, is this acceptable to your jury? Essentially, you know, if the jury doesn't
Mhm.
like it, if they don't like it, then, you know, essentially, you know, they're going to be like, well, we're not funding you. And then you have to somehow go on your own. So it's a bit of almost like a free speech kind of issue here, where it's like we're you know, the government is essentially through these systems are deciding which art is valid, which art is not valid, which art is
Yeah.
worth funding, which art is, you know, I would much prefer a system where it's more, you know, it's more open for creators just to do it via like a UBI system. I think UBI would be great for every Canadian, but if we can't do that, we can only do it for artists to start, then great, let's do that. Let's prove that this is a good system.
Mhm.
And let's start it on this cultural level. You know, if you're doing something culturally that's important, you know, just in general, then let's just give you this UBI, and then you can create for the betterment of Canadian society. But I think we do need to kind of, in my view, kind of parse that out from, you know, more commercial activity of music, which is, you know, really trying to create products in a global marketplace to compete globally with your products. And that, I think that's a different conversation, where I think that would be better for companies to be funding it, but we need to create a situation where it's possible for for new companies to compete in the marketplace. And I think that's what we're not in, because I would agree it's better, you know, if a company would be, hey, we're going to take you on, we're going to pay you a salary, and you're going to create for our company. Is that happening in
Mhm.
Canada? I don't think that's happening at all, you know, even for these companies that really could afford it. So
Mhm. Totally.
I think the government then needs to step in and provide solutions to allow, you know, the economic solution to kind of modernize. And my view is that it should be through IP, which has tons of value, as we're seeing. You know, it's proven that IP has tons of value. So that's just my view on it. But
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that for sure. Like, so when you're saying like having like a UBI that's like it's less about commercial music, is that what you're kind of proposing? Or like how do you differentiate, I guess, between what's for the betterment of Canadian culture and like what is just like you're
well,
trying to
I
sell
mean,
stuff?
yeah, sorry to cut you off. I would not. I feel it's personally, I don't think the government should be getting in there at all, because I think
No.
that's where we're getting into kind of like, you know, we're devaluing some speech and we're valuing some other speech based on, you know, kind of political reasonings. I think it's gonna be difficult to ever get away from that totally, but like if we create a system that's less about the content you're gonna make and more just about, you know, maybe your track record. You know, have you went to
Yeah.
school for music? Do you have a background in music? You know, if we're talking about
Hmm.
music, have you spent some years studying music? You know,
Hmm.
and that doesn't necessarily need to be through a university, but it's just like, you know, even it's like, did you get out of high school and you went straight to the streets and started busking and did that for 2 years? I mean, if that's the way you did it, then amazing. Let's support you.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
this is the next step to get you to create something that, you know, that Canada is going to be proud of.
Hmm.
And so I wouldn't just differentiate. I just think it's a different, it's potentially a different goal, because I think one is thinking more about commercially. It's thinking more in a, okay, we live in a capitalist world. Let's try to capitalize on this IP. And one of it is, okay, we're all humans here. We're trying to build a better society. We're trying to increase culture and kind of have a Canadian presence in the world, and that's what's important. So I mean, of course, they're kind of similar, but I think they should be approached differently.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I do think that, yeah, I do think that there is like an important differentiation there, and I also actually I do think that supporting some of that cultural, or like having the cultural thing be the primary focus in some art, I think that has a place, or it can have a place, especially because just the fact that that's kind of how the system has already existed, and it already has like historically prioritized certain things. So I, even as like a way just to kind
Hmm.
of, to, I don't know, because the system is already a complex system that kind of has all these various factors. I think it would be difficult to kind of, get rid of that completely without maybe causing some other unpredicted issues. But I think that either way, like there isn't. Again, I wonder though, and maybe this is, I don't know, resonant with what some of you were saying too, is that there's a perception though that like if you are a commercial musician, or even if you're thinking commercially, you still have to go through these funding things right now, and you still have to kind of do it their way. Even, like again, I can see in certain circumstances, like with the project thing, like if there's, I don't know, some kind of particular cultural event that's happening, or a particular day where there's like something that they want to fund that's related to that, and they don't care about having commercial success, I think that's great. Or like in general, for example, if they want to raise visibility of Indigenous Canadian art in Canada, and so providing public funding to kind of just increase visibility and awareness, particularly with a form of art that has been historically kind of marginalized and even devalued. I think like those kinds of things, there can be some good benefits in those programs and organizations to do that. But yeah, I think that there's an issue when like that becomes what everybody turns to, or that becomes like the solution, a solution for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And that's just the thing. It's like I don't think we need to have a situation where everything needs to be profitable, and that's why we have a government. That's why we have kind of a democracy to kind of just a supposed democracy to kind of help us decide this is what's important to Canadians, and I think right now it's super important that we're lifting up Indigenous voices, because they've been trampled on and continue to be, really. So this is what we should be investing in, and let's create a situation that helps lift up those voices that are not being heard still, those Indigenous voices that aren't being heard, that those people that don't know how to write a large grant, and they're probably just busking on the street somewhere. Let's create a solution that's going to work for them. And I personally don't see that at all. But
yeah, no, and sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but yeah, I also think like that in even in that sense though, that having like some kind of UBI like system would still be beneficial for everyone, because it's still not having to write the grant in the first place, or not having to at least write it in the way, like having to kind of fit in these boxes and describe it according to certain guidelines. Again, there might be some place for that, but I think that in general that would be helpful, even for just like raising up different like marginalized voices or whatever. There could be simpler or more streamlined ways of doing it, at least it seems like to me, than having some kind of centralized thing. I was also curious though, Nich, because you were mentioning before about like from a business perspective, and from like the perspective not just of an artist or artist entrepreneur, but also as like a small music business, that there are also like systematic obstacles in place from you kind of competing and participating fully. I don't know, do you think that that's, I don't know, like you were saying before that you think maybe like, okay, actually I maybe wanted to clarify something. You said that you thought that if artists were paid kind of maybe more like a UBI type of thing, that it would also be beneficial for small businesses and things like that.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Like especially in our current market, where when a lot of these small companies that maybe I would think have potentially the most human talent in the Canadian industry, where it's like they know what's going on, they know the industry well, but they don't they don't have access to millions of dollars. So that would be where you can actually create a real partnership between humans to create better products, and because you're not having to source the capital. Because if we had a system where we could source capital easier and more based on ideas, instead of basically have large amount of physical assets, then I would think it was different. But without that system, where we can't really source capital based on ideas in the music industry and the entertainment industry, we need a system where we can just simply have the ability to create the ideas, to create the products. Creating great brands great artists, great recordings, great songs, great IP is actually not that expensive, right? It's quite cheap to do that nowadays, and this is a new thing in the industry. Like before, it would maybe take hundreds of thousands of dollars to make a competitive album. Now you can make a competitive album in your bedroom, right? Like we've seen, like this has happened many times, right? That like some of the biggest albums in the world, some of the biggest records in the world are basically mostly created in a bedroom. So it's not that the IP, the ideas now are very cheap to create. So we just need to, but because of that, we have countless amounts of products that just aren't competitive or aren't going to work. So we need a system, I think, that's going to allow us to create better competitive products, but then also basically have the ability to take those good products and see them to market, where I think now there's not really that clear ability, because we have to go through all these gatekeepers that don't necessarily, I think they don't have the incentives to invest in these products. I don't, it certainly doesn't seem like anyone's making investments into these low level products, these new products, essentially, these new brands, these new artists.
Startups.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, it's like I think you need to think of every artist as our company, and we need to be creating investments based on that. Okay, like what's the market cap of this artist? Well, we know it's basically The Weeknd. I mean, if you're talking about commercial music, that's who you should be looking at. Like, and you see that rise. Like, how long did it take him to go from basically nothing to, worth, probably $1 billion now, right? So not that long, right? So is that going to happen all the time? No, but that happens one or two times in a decade, right? So if you look at your industry on that macro level, then I think you can make investments to these startup companies that make sense, but you have to have a system that works. If I was a Canadian investor, I would never invest in a startup in Canadian music, because those companies are inherently disadvantaged by $1 million per year against their competitors. So I would have to fund this company $1 million per year that would just go in the garbage to put them at the equal level to the legacy companies. And just on a competitive scale, not even the fact that these companies are going to be, making the majority of their profits based on, just legacy products that they don't have to do anything for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to me, it's like you could fix it in a multitude of ways, but I think on a human level, the easiest way to fix it would just be to give the humans the ability to grow their businesses.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay, cool. No, I like that. Also, I'm glad that I asked you that, because I appreciated that description there. There was a lot of good stuff in there. I enjoyed. I always like hearing you talk about this.
The man can talk.
So what's next for you? Let people know what's going on for you. Where's your activism going to take you? Where's your music career going to take you?
My activism. Well, I'm writing a new album is my main thing right now, and I'm going to be recording this spring. So that's I'm in that creative zone right now. And just trying to just keep it together, man. Finishing up another music video here, and it's kind of like closing out the With Pleasure cycle and starting a new one. So that's exciting. And as far as activism goes, well, I think I'm still gonna, do my best to apply some pressure where I can. And I don't know, maybe, I mean, I got so much like feedback from, my peers, very positive feedback, and just like a lot of encouragement and like, oh, good job, I'm so glad you did that kind of stuff. So I don't know, it'd be nice to maybe try and gather these people more and maybe keep these conversations going, because my greatest fear is just something like this just kind of is like a little blip and then it's gone, I guess. I think that happens a lot with any kind of movement in whatever direction. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of lean into it and see if I can keep some things moving, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, very cool. I wonder, like, it'd just be interesting in an alternate reality, you continuing on your journey here with, something like a UBI, what would be different, about your mental health and just,
Oh
I
yeah.
think you're gonna be able to keep on going here, obviously, and you're
Yeah.
super, super
I'm
dialed in.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely feel the stress of like, the financial precariousness is like my biggest stressor, I think,
Mm,
in my career at this point. It's not like, oh, do I have the ability to do my creative projects and like write songs? Like, of course I can do that, like 100%. Um, yeah, it's just kind of like feeling like I can sustain myself enough because I do feel like I'm kind of in this little, I don't know, it's hard to say, but like I do feel like I'm in this little in between like, where I'm at and where I'm going. Like I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of confusing,
mm,
but it's kind of like that moment before the next kind of level up is what it feels like anyway. And so the main thing is just like,
yeah, absolutely. I think 2023 is
pers-
probably going to be that for basically everyone. It's like the middle time
yeah,
where we find out what shakes out because
totally.
things are looking pretty dire, you know,
Yeah.
on a lot of
And
avenues, right?
oh, big time. And I think that's where, mentally right now, mental health is like just everyone's struggling a lot with the mental health
Hmm.
because everyone just feels burnt out and a little bit hopeless in a lot of ways, I think, just seeing how things are shaking out like around the globe and with the environment and like just with everything. And it could be kind of hard to like see how the little thing you're doing is gonna like make an impact or like make a positive contribution or so I don't know. I'm just kind of like I am trying my best to just take care of my mental health. It's like, like eating properly, moving my body. It's like all the basic things. They sound so basic, but like
Yeah.
it makes a huge difference. It's like if I'm in a bit of a slump, like even yesterday I had a bit of a dip in my mood and I was like, you know what, I gotta go to the basement and like lift some weights and just like work up a sweat a little bit. And like sure enough, after that, I was like, I do feel better than I did, which is good. But I think a lot of people right now are feeling emotionally just like this constantly. It's like day to day can be so different, right?
Yeah.
But I think like what becomes important then too is like talking about it and knowing that you don't have to just like deal with all of that on your own. I think there is a lot of comfort in knowing that people are going through the same thing, and even if it, that's not going to solve your problems per se, but at least you're not kind of getting too you're not looking too inward where you're kind of feeling sorry for yourself too because like at the end of the day like we're all living on this planet and just trying to do our thing. So and yeah, I think our like digital existences too, I mean not so much for you, Nick, because you've done a really good job of staying off of social media, but just the way that technology has played a role in separating us in a lot of ways. Like I'm really like thinking about like, okay, how can I have more in-person connections or even like just one-on-one connections, setting up like maybe I'm not in the same physical space as someone, but like, I think relationships are super important. And yeah, so just not getting too lost in the chaos and finding those ways to stay grounded, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really well said. I think that's the key is everyone just kind of trying to hang on and figure out and do what's right to you and not get stuck in the studio dark hole.
Go outside.
Yeah, I did go outside today. I will admit that was
Okay, good.
really good for me.
Yeah.
What about you, Kessler? What are you going to be up to this week?
Yeah, I'm gonna be doing more reading and more writing. I'm also doing some cool eclectic composing projects right now, which are a lot of fun. But I will also say that it's going to be a priority for me, especially this time of year, to stay grounded and make sure to get outside of my own head sometimes, also outside of my own room, but also outside of my own head.
Outside of the room, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, they're
Love to
both
see
important,
it.
the physical space and the mental space.
Yeah. Well, I'm super like interested in how like your physical environment or what you're doing physically can actually influence, how you feel on the inside. Because a lot of times with like, talk therapy and stuff, like that stuff's awesome. I love it. But sometimes it can be very like top down. And there's just like so much research now and studies being like, well, actually, if you like go move your body, like it'll change the internal landscape for you. So yeah, I don't know. Movement is definitely on my list of priorities right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, okay. So if anyone wants to know more about VISSIA, check out our website at vissiamusic.com. There's also an article that just came out regarding this EIA, Edmonton International Airport, that came out on Exclaim. So everyone should check that one out. I think that's really good. And that'll help VISSIA because that's a music blog.
They wrote about me.
Yeah, so that's cool. And this has been our maiden voyage of Songplode Disruptor podcast. Thanks a lot to Kessler and VISSIA to be out here hanging
Thanks for
out for a
having me.
couple minutes, I guess.
Yeah.
Who knows how long this has been? I have no idea. But I think it's good. So
Yeah.
thanks a lot. We're gonna check out this. We got the end title logo that I've created, which I'm just gonna smash it right now. And here we go. Boom. Disruptor podcast.
Ooh.
Thanks everyone for hanging out. Bye.
Cheers.